Welcome to this explainer. We're going to dive into a pretty wild story here. A huge policy shift from the Federal Reserve that happened, get this, in less time than it takes for most free trials to run out. It's a really fascinating look at just how fast the financial world can turn on a dime. So let's get right into it. The heart of this whole thing is the Federal Reserve's incredibly fast pivot. They went from a policy of shrinking their balance sheet, quantitative tightening, or QT, to suddenly expanding it all over again. It's whiplash-inducing. And this number right here, 12, this is everything. Just 12 days. That's the entire gap between the Fed slamming on the brakes and then stomping right back on the gas. It's an unbelievably short time frame that, frankly, caught a lot of people off guard. Okay, so let's just map this out so you can see how fast it happened. On December 1st, the Fed officially ends its big program, quantitative tightening. Okay, then, just 9 days later, on the 10th, they announce a completely new plan to start buying up government debt again. And then, a mere 2 days after that, on the 12th, they actually start buying. That is a full 180-degree policy reversal in less than 2 weeks. Incredible. All right. So now let's dig into the evidence, right? Let's look at what the Fed itself actually said. And to really get what's going on, you gotta wade through their official language, which, let's be honest, is often super dense and full of jargon. And here it is. This is straight from the Fed's own implementation notes. Yeah, it's a total mouthful, but the only words you really need to focus on are increasing and purchases. Okay, let's translate that Fed speak into plain English. What this really truly means is that the Fed's balance sheet, the very same one they were just trying to shrink, is now set to get bigger again. They are jumping back into the market to actively buy up government debt. It is a complete 180 from what they were saying just a few days earlier. And we're not talking about a small little operation here. The initial plan is to buy about $40 billion worth in just the first month. That alone should give you a real sense of the scale we're dealing with. And this, of course, brings us to the big debate, the central question. What is this policy really? Because the Fed calls it one thing, but the source material we're looking at suggests it's something else entirely, something we've definitely seen before. So you've got two competing stories here. On one side, you have the Fed's official line. They're calling it reserve management, a technical little tweak to make sure banks have enough cash on hand. But on the other side, you've got the source's take. They're just calling it money printing. The argument is, look, whatever you label it, the end result is exactly the same as quantitative easing. You're creating new money out of thin air to buy government debt. Now, the Fed is very specific. They say they're buying treasury bills, or T-bills. But here's the thing. Whether it's a T-bill, a T-note, or a T-bond, it's all just government debt. It's an IOU from the government. The only real difference is how long until you get paid back. And the source argues that getting caught up on the type of debt totally misses the bigger picture. Yeah, and if you're feeling a little skeptical about the Fed's language, well, you should be, because this isn't a new playbook. We've seen this movie before, and very recently. You just have to rewind to 2019. There was a crisis in something called the repo market. That's basically where banks lend to each other overnight. And it just froze up. So the Fed stepped in to provide liquidity by, you guessed it, buying treasury bills. And the justification, it sounded almost identical to what they're saying today. Oh, this is just a technical move for market plumbing. It's not a big stimulus thing. And that whole episode led to this now infamous quote from Fed Chair Jerome Powell. He was crystal clear at the time. He went on camera and said, quote, "This is not QE." And that right there, that perfectly illustrates the source's entire point. Critics immediately started calling that 2019 program not QE, kind of sarcastically, Because while the Fed was denying the label, the actual mechanism was identical. They were creating new money to buy government debt, which is, for all intents and purposes, the definition of QE. Okay, so we've been deep in the weeds with Fed policy and financial jargon. But let's pull way back and get to the most important question of all. Why should you care? Why does any of this actually matter for you and your wallet? Look, if you take one thing away from all of this, let it be this. When the Fed creates money to buy assets, the total amount of money floating around in the economy, what we call the money supply, it goes up, it expands. And that has very real consequences for every single one of us. And this isn't some future prediction. Here's the data right now. The Fed's own numbers for M2, that's a big, broad measure of the money supply, show it's already growing at 4.4% a year. And get this, that was before this new round of purchases even started. So this new policy, it's basically pouring gasoline on an already burning fire. The source uses this really great analogy. They say an expanding money supply is like a rising tide that lifts all boats. But in this case, it's a tide that lifts all prices. We're talking about the price of almost everything tending to go up. From your everyday stuff like groceries and gas to the big ticket items like cars and houses, and even assets like gold and Bitcoin. And that really leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. The data is clear, the money supply is expanding, and the Fed's policy is now set to make it expand even faster. So the question this whole thing leaves you with is, are you positioned for that rising tide?
If you like this video, please hit the subscribe button, like, and share.